to my channel, and today we are going to be reading Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stones by J.K. Rowling. Oh, now I have to get my Harry Potter pajamas. There we go. Now let's get reading. Oh. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the big director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and she had nearly twice the usual amount of a neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on neighbours. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no Finnerball anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband was as Dursley-ish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbours would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never ever seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on a dull grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mrs. Dursley's hummed as he picked out of his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screamed Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large, tawny owl fluttered past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley out on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed. Because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the wall. "Little tight," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into the car and backed out of his number 4's drive. I don't get this because it says 4's drive. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. Again, it was on the corner of that street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realise what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. Hopefully the cat is not sneaking up to him. I fucking know who it is because I've seen a lot of Harry Potter movies, and there's one person who's a little obsessed with cats. Actually, two. One which is a nice teacher, and second, the one that wanted to rule over Hogwarts, but instead she was on the evil team now. Strange. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of jewels he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, jewels were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dress in funny clothes. They get up fashion, You saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see what the couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him! But when it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunds car park, his mind back on drills on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on the drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in the broad of daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mrs. Dursley, however, had a perfect, normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls, and when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite, he'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily. As he passed, he didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large doughnut in a bag, that they caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters, that's right, that's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something of them, but thought better of it. He dashed across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his moustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He wasn't sure there was a lot of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. He'd never ever seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying. Mrs. Dursley, she always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her, as if he'd had a sister like that, but all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as a tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realised that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset, but at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face slipped into a wild smile, and he said in a squeaking voice that made passers-by stare, "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. So that's it for today. We're going to continue this story next time, like next week, I guess. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and also comment down below what's going to happen next. See you in the next video. Bye!